Well, hello there, you're watching the press preview. A first look at what is on the front pages. Time to see then what is making the headlines with the political editor of the Daily Mirror, Pippa, Crerar, and the editor of the Jewish Chronicle, Jake Wallis-Simons. Lovely to see you both, and I know you're both with us until just before midnight, so let's crack on with the front pages then. The Guardian leads with the resumption of peace talks over Ukraine and those claims that Roman Abramovich was poisoned, along with other talks delegates at a previous session earlier this month. The Daily Mail also focusing on the suspected poisoning of Mr. Abramovich, adding that the Russian billionaire was blinded and lost his sight for several hours after the incident. The FT carries a warning from the Governor of the Bank of England that rising prices will cause Britons what he calls a historic shock to their incomes. Meanwhile, the Daily Telegraph reports that Scotland Yard is expected to issue the first fines over Partygate imminently, after concluding that COVID laws were broken at the heart of government. Duke back on parade, the Metro says Prince Andrew will attend his late father's memorial service, his first public appearance since settling his sex abuse allegations case in the United States. The Eye reports that the UK's new energy strategy is being delayed because of a row between the Prime Minister and the Chancellor over the cost of building new nuclear power stations. Hollywood Punch-Up is the headline for The Sun, referring to that moment where Will Smith slapped Chris Rock during the Oscar ceremony. The paper says the Academy has now launched a formal review into the incident. Well, a reminder, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. So let's bring in then Pippa Crerar and Jake Wallis-Simons. Hello to both of you. And straight to The Guardian, Jake, and this intriguing story about what happened to the Chelsea owner.
This is a very, very strange story indeed. So apparently Roman Abramovich has been engaging in some intermediary work, trying to mediate between the Russians and the Ukrainians to try to find some resolution to this war. And in early March, he was engaging in a visit on the border of Belarus for this purpose and ended up having eaten nothing but chocolate and drunk nothing but water that evening, ended up becoming blinded for a number of hours, having peeling skin and stabbing pains in his eyes and also peeling skin on his hands as well. But not only he suffered those symptoms, but also members of the Ukrainian delegation who were with him suffered it as well. So it seems like this attack was in some strange way either indiscriminate or botched, or wasn't an attack, it was something else. And nobody really knows what happened, whether it was an intentional poisoning, some sort of chemical weapons attack, or some sort of environmental issue, which the American sources have been suggesting. But either way, it is a very, very troubling affair, and it shows how much cloak and dagger stuff really does go on in these sorts of situations. I should add that the Mail was reporting today that the attack was perpetrated by Moscow hardliners who were trying to derail the talks. So who knows what's really going on, but the Mail seems to have taken that line.
Absolutely, and the claims first reported by the Wall Street Journal and the investigative journalism outlet Bellingcat. Bellingcat suggesting the symptoms included eye and skin inflammation, piercing pain in the eyes, added that the three men recovered quickly. The US suggesting that the evidence did not point to poisoning, but it all leads into the talks which are expected to take place tomorrow in Istanbul. Presumably security and everybody watching carefully what they eat and drink there, Pippa.
Well, you'd have thought so. And, I mean, the role of Abramovich in all of this is really, as Jake rightly says, fascinating, not least because he was one of the most high-profile oligarchs to be sanctioned by the UK, and that there's some suggestion that the US Treasury initially held off on sanctioning him because he had suggested that he might be able to step in to try and help de-escalate the crisis in Ukraine and help even rebuild Ukraine afterwards. He, of course, is incredibly close to Vladimir Putin. But then, of course, we now see a situation where he's been sanctioned. All of this sort of overshadows, really, the first face-to-face talks between the two countries, between Ukraine and Russia, which are being held in Istanbul tomorrow. The first face-to-face talks for 2 weeks, I should say. They have met before. And I think there's very little hope in all of the papers that are reporting on this. There seems to be very little hope that there's going to be any imminent breakthrough or even any breakthrough at all. But the very fact that they're meeting at all does sort of suggest that the dynamic has shifted a little bit in the last couple of weeks, when you also take into account the military situation on the ground, the fact that Russia's approaches and attempts to encircle Kyiv look like they are so far unsuccessful, and that they've obviously had such a sort of a blow to the logistics and support system on the ground, which has resulted in this conflict going on for much longer than they'd initially anticipated. So, there are various factors on the table. Different papers mention different ones. Neutrality is a key one, because Zelensky has obviously spoken about that in the last 24 hours, whether it could be enforced by some sort of international security guarantees, whether the contested bits of Ukraine, both the Crimea and the parts of the eastern Donbass, could effectively have some sort of semi-autonomous role. That's something that Zelensky's resisted so far, but it could yet happen. And of course, the key and most immediate one is the withdrawal of Russian troops from the rest of Ukraine. So, no suggestion that there's going to be an imminent breakthrough in any of those, but you've got to take some hope from the fact that they're meeting at all.
Yes, and the FT talking about Ukrainian forces regaining ground, specifically in this northwesterly area of Kiev, the Irpin, which we all remember because that's the bridge that was destroyed, and all refugees were fleeing there, under bombardment, including people, the infirm being carried in shopping trolleys. So that really sticks in the mind. And all of this, Jake, coming as Joe Biden spoke again tonight, saying about this idea of whether he was calling for regime change at the back end of last week. I was expressing, he said, the moral outrage that I felt towards this man. I wasn't articulating a policy change. So will that put this all to bed, do you think?
I think that the Russians might not see it in quite such a generous way as Mr. Biden is hoping. It's all very well for him to try to row back after the event, but these comments matter. Our own Prime Minister has made a few foreign policy gaffes in the past, not least with regard to listening to Guy Ratcliffe, if you remember that. And these things do matter because our enemies take them very seriously. And for them, the idea that they would say that was just a slip of the tongue and let's overlook it, perhaps is fanciful. But it is interesting, nonetheless, that the Ukraine is making these big gains in the war, and very encouraging as well. In fact, on that small FT story that you just flashed up on the screen a couple of minutes ago, I was interested to see that according to US defense sources, Ukrainians are still in control of Mariupol. And I had thought, frankly, that Mariupol had been all but obliterated and that Ukrainians had been routed by the Russians. And it was a humanitarian catastrophe. And of course, it is a humanitarian catastrophe, but the fact that Ukrainian forces are still in control of that city is a mark of how well they're doing relatively in this war and how much cause for hope there is at the moment. Tentative hope, but hope nonetheless.
Right, so we move on to Partygate. Pippa, you can obviously take this one away. Right, what are we expecting? Will this be the first tranche of fines, and will the Prime Minister be included?
So there's been a bit of a hiatus in the whole Partygate affair as the police have investigated, and quite understandably, a lot of the tension has focused away from domestic issues to what's been going on in Ukraine. But we've had suggestions tonight from sources that the police are on the verge, on the cusp of issuing their first round of fines. We're expecting maybe 15 or 20 people to be issued fixed penalty notices tomorrow, confirming that there was law breaking at the heart of Downing Street and government during lockdown with those social gatherings. It is, as you rightly say, Anna, just the first tranche. The expectation is that there will be more to follow, not least because really quite substantial number of people received questionnaires from the police, some of them only really in the last couple of weeks. So the police have only really just got that information back. So this is the first wave. We're not expecting the Prime Minister to be amongst those tomorrow. The sources are suggesting that it's sort of the uncontested, non-controversial individuals and breaches that will be focused on with this first wave. Of course, the Prime Minister is anything but uncontroversial or uncontested in his involvement in it. So I expect to see that further down the line. And there's also some suggestion that Cressida Dick, who's the outgoing commissioner, due to step down to leave the Met in the middle of next month, middle of April, is keen to have this inquiry done and dusted by the time she leaves, so she doesn't need to hand it all on to her successor. Whether that is, in fact, in her gift, as this inquiry continues, we've had more than 100 questionnaires sent out, as I say. There was 12 separate gatherings being investigated, at least six of which the Prime Minister was said to have been at himself. Hundreds of photos and documents for the police to sort of pore over. Whether her hopes of it all being resolved by the time she leaves are deliverable, remains in doubt.
OK, fascinating. Well, we'll certainly watch out for that, won't we, on Tuesday? Plenty more still to come in the next part of our programme, including the fallout after all that drama at the Oscars. Back in a second. Well, welcome back. You're watching the press preview. With me now, the political editor of the Daily Mirror, Pippa Crerar, and the editor of the Jewish Chronicle, Jake Wallis-Simons. Welcome back to both of you. Jake, let's go to The Guardian, shall we? In the inside pages too, of which there's plenty of coverage. The slap at the Oscars.
This has been the biggest story of the past 24 hours on Twitter anyway. Will Smith slapped Chris Rock on stage after the comedian had insulted his girlfriend his wife, I beg your pardon. And, for me, I think it's really a head and heart issue. For my head, I find it difficult to condone this kind of behaviour. But in my heart, I feel that the insult was so egregious and so public, it's hard not to feel some sympathy for Will Smith at losing it. And I think a lot of us would have been hard-pressed to have prevented ourselves from acting the same way if a similar insult had been levelled at our wives or fiancés or girlfriends. So I feel a lot of sympathy for him, but my head says, no, this is unacceptable. Well,
I mean, this is what do the Academy members think too? The Metro reporting that Smith may be stripped of his Oscar, the highlight of his career at that moment, Pippa. A slap in the face, they call it.
Yeah, well, the source is quoted on the front of the Metro saying that he might be stripped of his Oscar, but then Whoopi Goldberg, who is one of the governors of the Academy, says that they're not going to take his Oscar away. You can't help but think that this hasn't really worked out very well for anyone, not least Smith himself, who's, of course, won his first Oscar, and this has overshadowed that event, but also the ceremony more generally, which had numerous examples of sort of diversity breakthroughs in terms of the awards. And, this has overshadowed that as well, with this row over whether he should or shouldn't have slapped Chris Rock and brought up all sorts of issues about violence. And, in the wake of the Me Too movement, the Academy drew up a code of conduct which has driven these calls for him to be stripped of the award. But then, of course, historically, there's a whole load of more controversial figures that could possibly apply to that it hasn't. So, I'd be surprised if they did actually end up doing that.
Quick 30 seconds on the other story on the front page of the Metro, Jake, if you don't mind, which is Prince Andrew. What's the suggestion here?
Prince Andrew is appearing in public for the first time since he paid a reported £12 million to his accuser to settle the sex case without taking any guilt on board. And the event he's attending is a memorial service for his father, the late Prince Philip. And I just feel that, yes, it sticks in the throat to see him in public in this sort of way, but at the same time, it's a memorial service for his father, and it'd be difficult to deprive anybody of that.
Jake Wallis-Simons, Pippa Crerar, thank you both very much indeed. Thank you.